Well, hi everyone. Hi everyone. Yeah, show some energy. It's only 4 p.m. and it's only second day of the convention or the summit. When I last checked the app, what is called Whoa, right? Yeah, there was 34 people uh, that said scheduled to attend this conference or this session, sorry. And there aren't 34 people here. So what I'm going to do is take a picture of you all as a witness that you were here. And those who are not here, I'll send them a reminder that we missed them. So can you smile, all of you? Or maybe stand up? Nah, no, I just go like, here you go. Here we go. All right. So my name is Amarjeet Sohi. I am a recovering politician. I was the mayor of Edmonton for 4 years. So, welcome to our beautiful city. I hope you're enjoying your visit. And please do go out, spend some of your money in our city, and enjoy the hospitality. There's some exciting stuffs happening. There's a Taste of Edmonton food festival 2 blocks away from here by City Hall. Also, the Klondike Days. So take that in and some of the games too. So, so thank you so much for joining us. This session is about the role of PNWER region can play in North America's critical minerals supply chain. We'll be talking about everything from mining and processing to the transportation infrastructure. Oh, this is your phone. Oh, here you go. Sir, here you go. Yeah. Yeah. Uh, we will be talking about everything from mining and processing to the transportation infrastructure that moves these resources and the skilled workforce we need to develop and sustain them. We're very fortunate to have a panel of leaders with diverse backgrounds and experiences. They will share their perspectives on the policy environment, investment opportunities and challenges. We will discuss the need for cross-border collaboration to help us strengthen the PNWER region's supply chains and support our energy, manufacturing, and national security priorities. The PNWER region already has a lot going for it. We have rich mineral resources, we have strong processing capacity, and deep manufacturing expertise. But if we want to be a truly resilient supply chain, we will need even stronger collaboration across jurisdictions. We have about 90 minutes together today. I will start by posing some questions to the panelists for maybe first 40 to 45 minutes. Then we will open up for questions. I think that is going to be very important part of the conversations because that's where you actually get the most out of the panelists by having the audience engage and ask questions. We are very lucky to have three prominent leaders join us. We are so honored that we have Honorable Caitlin Cleveland, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, and Minister of Industry, Tourism, and Investment with the government of Northwest Territories. Please give a round to Minister Cleveland. We are also joined by Matthew Vincent on virtually. Can you turn on your camera, Matthew? Here we are. Matthew is the executive director of the Montana Mining Association. Please give a round of applause to welcome to Matthew. And we're also very honored that we have Heather Exner-Pirot, Director of Energy, Natural Resources, and Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Round of welcome to Heather. So, what are we going to do? we're going to ask three of our panelists to make some opening remarks, and they have some of them have some slides that they would like to share. But I'm going to start with Heather to kind of set the foundation. So when we are talking about Heather, when we're talking about critical minerals, what are we actually talking about? Yeah,
Great question, because we're often talking about different things
yeah.
past each other. And then the other question is, what are we talking about critical minerals when we're talking about PNWER? So I'll just start. I'm a political scientist. So I don't have, the technical or the economic background, but why I care about critical minerals is because I'm from Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan was largely an agricultural province. In a good harvest year, we were a have province. In a bad harvest year, we were a have not. And in the last commodity cycle, it really became much more of a mining province and driven by potash and uranium, which it happens to be, the global leader in those two very important commodities. So the world's number two producer of uranium, number one producer of potash, which we use for fertilizer. And so that's kind of what, drove my love for commodities. It's unusual passion to have. But that's why I care about mining, and I care very much about the geopolitical cycles and the economic cycles around it, because I saw the real difference for the people of Saskatchewan when the sector was doing well versus when it was not doing well. It's much better to be in Saskatchewan when mining is doing well. And so it is, probably in the last 5 years that we have talked about critical minerals, and where the idea of securitizing or prioritizing minerals kind of started in 2010, when the Chinese first started to weaponize rare earth exports. And they had become dominant and developed monopoly on several mining products, but rare earths may be the most prominent. And in a dispute with Japan, had put export restrictions and threatened those against Western nations. That's the first time where everyone thought, "Whoa, maybe this bottleneck is an issue. Maybe this dominance by a potential adversary is a problem." And Japan took it seriously, but most of the rest of us kind of said, well, it's just cheaper from China, so we'll just continue on as it is. After COVID caused so many supply chain disruptions, people started to care about supply chains again, and logistics, and who you got your products from. And after Russia invaded Ukraine, we would all say, wow, I can't believe the Europeans let themselves be so dependent on Europe for natural gas and put themselves in this problem, this energy crisis. And almost immediate, you have to say, we've done the exact same thing with critical minerals. We are more dependent on China for critical minerals than Europe is on Russia for natural gas. And you can see where this is likely to head. And with the Trump 1.0 as well as Trump 2.0, there's obviously, trade disputes between China and the United States, and China became increasingly active in weaponizing its dominance over particular minerals. Now, what I want to make a big distinction for our conversation is that it's not all minerals are dominated by China, and not all minerals markets are unhealthy. Not all of them are weaponized and manipulated, but a lot of them are. But uranium, potash, gold, metallurgical coal, zinc, those are fairly healthy markets. That's most of what we get GDP in our region, diamonds, and those have not been manipulated. And it's more of the commodity cycle and permitting regulatory burden that has been their, kind of their problem. But there is a subset of minerals which are security defense oriented, which China does dominate, which probably we do need more of a public sector intervention. I'm a free market, kind of philosophical person, but there are some minerals where the market is not free, and there is a role for our governments to do something to ensure we have security of supply. And gallium, germanium, antimony, rare earths, tungsten, graphite, those will be on top of the list for NATO, for the United States, for Canada, where you say we need to do a bit more. We need to accommodate for the fact that the market is manipulated. It is not free. If we just let the private sector, do it, they will not develop germanium markets. They will not develop gallium markets because they don't make a lot of money and it's very volatile. So when we're thinking about what is it that PNWER should do, what is that Canada should do, the United States, we're mostly thinking about what do we do about those dozen or so niche minerals markets that the Chinese dominate and weaponize. But we also need to think for our own economic security, well, how do we become a better producing jurisdiction for all these minerals, all these products, because it's good for work, it's good for productivity, it's good for exports, it's good for economies. And also, you don't want to be the next commodity that becomes commoditized, weaponized, that becomes dominated by somebody else. And so I think in our discussion today, we'll want to talk about, well, what are our strengths? What do we have geologically, the processing? What are things that we could do to improve our situation just by better permitting, some better infrastructure? And what are things that maybe actually need government intervention, either with stockpiles, equity, offtake agreements, more robust kind of intervention that in most minerals, we actually wouldn't want that kind of intervention.
That's great to set the conversation going. So Matthew, I want to follow up with you on maybe you can follow up on Heather's remarks, and you have some slides that you want to share with the participants as well. So one of the questions I would have as you make your presentation is like, what advantages does our region, the PNWER region, have that other parts of North America may not?
Very good. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be with you all. Heather, you did a great job of kicking us off. And I don't know, I can't see what slide you have me up on there, but you can go ahead and skip past that first slide. We all know what we're talking about and where we are, and now you know who I am. Just real, and I guess I can answer your question right out of the gate. What advantages we have is we have the majority of these materials and minerals that are deemed critical. Obviously, I'm going to be focusing on how the U.S. defines critical, but the reality is we've got pretty much all of them, and Montana is not what it used to be in terms of mining, but what we do, we still do very well. I'm not going to go through all of these bullets, but I think it's important to see that we are still a top producer of some very important elements. The ones in yellow are ones that are critical. And that last bullet, we already are the only antimony producer. We're the only platinum group metals producer, and we have a lot of additional critical minerals projects that are being advanced through exploration, where some permit for reform could really do us some good. And we've been talking about that for at least 3 administrations now, with not a whole lot of relief, but I'm hoping we can still get there as this becomes more and more crucial. But going to that next slide after the Montana leading slide that's got the special forces person on here. I mean, defense is the biggest thing that I think we really need to focus on. Obviously, a lot of these critical minerals that we are reliant on geopolitical adversaries for. We can probably get by through private sector there, but to quote our current president of our association, it's probably not a good idea to be buying the things you need to make missiles and defense systems from the people that you have the missiles pointed at, and vice versa. And so this slide really just kind of shows some of the critical elements that go into the combat gear for a U.S. Navy SEAL. And you'll notice that largest group of them are controlled by China. So not a good position for us to be in. I think we all know what the definition of a critical mineral is. So I'll ask you to go to the next slide. This is, and I'm focusing on things that have just happened in the last 12 months. I mean, I was in Bellevue last year this time talking about critical minerals. And so some big things have happened since then, the least of which isn't a new critical minerals and materials list. In November of 25, that list you see there of 60 elements is the new list of critical minerals. And those are things that are vulnerable to supply chain disruption. And if you're wondering what the ones in orange represent, those are the ones, not maybe, but those are the ones that China has already exerted export restrictions on. And it represents 40% of the list of critical materials there. And so we are already facing some increased restrictions that we weren't facing when we had this conversation last July. And it extends even beyond those listed elements. It includes, if you go to the bottom of that slide, it also includes molybdenum and super hard materials. But the big one is, and this is where, my last slide will focus on this, they're also restricting, China is also restricting the processing technology and the equipment used for us to become self-sufficient in these areas. And that is a big issue because it goes from the natural resources and the raw materials themselves to the human resources and the workforce expertise that we need to break free from this. But not to be all doom and gloom, I think this slide that's up that titled Critical Minerals Progress over the last year, it runs through what has been accomplished just over the last year. And I know the major focus has been on the announcement of the 50% tariffs that the administration is levying towards Canada, but I would focus on the fact that that those do not apply to energy, potash, or critical minerals. I know it's hard to lose sight of how impactful that an announcement like that is. But have we talked about the other major announcement that was made yesterday, which was the most recent executive order that talks about securing America's defense supply chains? We are going to be in a much better place for tracking where all of these critical minerals are produced and processed that go into protecting ourselves and our allies and ensuring that we are domestically acquiring these materials. And that's a big one. That for this conversation today, that's what we really should be focusing on, because what's good for the US is good for Canada and vice versa. So major investments, there's been over $30 billion of investments announced just in the last year. Those include direct investment where the federal government, and to Heather's point that we need to start seeing some more public sector involvement in these niche markets. She talked about I don't know how you put it, Heather, but the healthy markets. Those are ones that are too large for China to manipulate. There's a lot of these critical minerals, probably starting with the 40% that they have exerted their restriction over, that they very much can manipulate because they control 80% of that supply chain. So there's been a lot of direct investment in companies by the federal government, billions of dollars in grants from the Department of Energy, the Department of War, and EPA. The DOE and EPA grants are really looking at processing, whereas the Department of War grants might be looking at directly increasing the ability for them to acquire some of these necessary minerals. And then a big share has been in the development finance corporations, loans, and credit agreements with a variety of different projects in some of our allied countries. You got the Project Vault, which is a strategic mineral reserve in a public-private partnership. You got the Forge initiative, which is that big consortium of countries that are working together to reduce China's dominance in critical minerals. And in Montana itself, the U.S. Antimony Corporation, which represents that only antimony production that we currently have in the U.S., that is a direct product of a $27 million grant from the Defense Production Act Title III funds, as well as a $245 million contract. That a good example of public sector involvement here is the federal government has put forth a contract for a set amount of antimony at a set price, which gives certainty to these companies for them to be able to have the investment confidence in moving forward. And I don't want to take up a whole lot more time, but you can see in the rest of those bullets there. I mean, I think we just got a lot of good things that have taken place just in the last year. And those last three bullets there are four bullets are policies that are making their way through Congress. We're still trying to get better permitting through the Regulatory Clarity Act. We're trying to add in requirements so that we can be more circular in our mineral economies. So it's not just all coming out as primary source, but we're able to capture more secondary elements as in our waste streams and recycling processes. And that last one, which is why I got old Charlie Ordigger there on the bottom corner of the slide, is the Mining Schools Act. And that's what's going to address the human resources and expertise needs that we need to. There's 14 mining schools designated in the US. I think it needs to start there, but branch out, and we're already seeing it branch out. There's other universities that are resurrecting mining related and critical minerals processing related programs that haven't been there in a while, but there's a great view of the programs that Montana Tech has in my hometown of Butte, and the ones in yellow, again, focusing specifically on critical minerals. These are all great advancements. I think we just need to try and, to the best we can, tune out the political noise of tariffs and other things and focus on continuing to make progress so that we can become self-sufficient in these critical minerals.
Thank you, Matthew. Some of the policy challenges that you have identified that you are facing on your side are pretty much similar to what we are facing here on our side, as well as the opportunities around defense and safety, and how that is compelling us to look together, how we can work together. So thank you so much. So Minister Cleveland, thank you so much for being here. I know you've been traveling a lot. You came here all the way from Halifax, and you have some opening remarks and some slides that you want to share with the audience. So let's do that. But I also do have a question on the labor workforce, right? No, I'll come to that later, but let's go through the presentation. Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And then I have a bad habit of talking with my hands, and so then I won't throw the microphone at anybody, which is good. So can we go over to the next slide? Thank you so much. So for me to stand up here and say I'm from the Northwest Territories probably sounds like, well, who is this person and where the heck are they from? So if we were all to go get into a vehicle together and drive for 16 hours, we would get to my front door. And we would have to drive 16 hours almost essentially due north from here. And we would come to the Northwest Territories, which is home to about 44,000 people. We are the middle child of 3 territories in Canada. We are right between Yukon and Nunavut. And together, all 3 territories have about 135,000 people. This is significant because this landmass in Canada accounts for 40% of Canada's landmass and 75% of Canada's coastline. In addition to that, any minister or anyone you talk to from either of the three territories will tell you that they live in a pretty special part of the world. In the Northwest Territories, I live on Great Slave Lake, which is the larger lake to the south that you can see. And that is Canada's deepest lake. And so we have some pretty cool fishing. And so if you want to see a pound or a picture of what a 56-pound trout looks like, I'm more than happy to show you what it looks like to hug a trout. And then to the north of that, we've got Great Bear Lake, which is Canada's largest lake. In addition to that, we've got some pretty amazing rock, which is what you're all here to hear about. So we've got rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, copper, zinc, tungsten, bismuth, gold, diamonds that all make up our most significant resources in the Northwest Territories. And the reason that some of those are pretty significant is we've got the cleanest deposits of zinc in the world, the largest deposit of tungsten that we share on the border with the Yukon, and the 13th largest deposit of cobalt in the Americas. And so we don't know a lot about all of our geology because, like I said before, the territories account for 40% of Canada's landmass. As you can imagine, a lot of harsh environment, a lot of areas we need to get into. As PNWER representative, I'm about to tell you why that's important and significant to you guys. But certainly every rock that we have kind of turned over, we've realized is a pretty sexy rock and we want to see more of them. So if I can go forward to the next couple of slides and one more, please. Thank you so much. So this kind of goes into a little bit more detail that we can talk about a little later about some of our significant deposits. So you can roughly see on the map there, and if anybody wants to take home a map, we've got some printouts that we can give you as well. But we've got our Nico deposit, which was just supported with a $50 million access road through the federal government. And this contains over 10% of the global bismuth reserves, as well as cobalt. That mine is fully permitted, and what has been holding it back is that access road. So infrastructure is huge in our territories, and I'm sure you will hear about infrastructure through any other person you talk to at PNWER over the next few days. We also have Nachalacho, which has two different rare earth element deposits in it. We've got Mactung, which is our tungsten deposit. We've got two lead zinc deposits, one of which also has a significant amount of silver with it. And then we also have the Yellowknife lithium project. There's a lot more other deposits on the go in the territory. These are the ones that I've chosen to put a lot of my time into because they are advanced projects. And as we'll get into, we need to kind of decide where we're going to put our time and really push projects forward, especially in a territory whose GDP is reliant on diamonds at a time where you don't want to be reliant on diamonds. So if we can jump forward. So we're in the process right now of seeing our diamond mines close. Our first one closed in March. It closed on time. It was expected to close in March. And then unexpectedly, we've had a second, so a second of three that went through a CCAA process, was not successful in finding a buyer, and now has gone to a receiver. And so we're looking at doing the remediation of that site as a government, which is where you never want to find yourself. But at the same time that we're doing that, through this current federal government, we have seen more attention on the Arctic than we have ever seen in my lifetime, and that is huge. It is huge for us right now and huge for us when we talk about the need for infrastructure, because this unlocks a lot of land in the territory for us to be able to access a lot more critical minerals. So Mackenzie Valley Highway is an 800-kilometer access road. It is a Diefenbaker promise, so it is a promise that was made to Canadians over 70 years ago, and one that we are finally able to capitalize on. And I am very much looking forward to driving that road and my kids not having to talk about wanting to see a Mackenzie Valley Highway in their lifetime, or to advocate for it. And so Mackenzie Valley Highway was recently put into the list for the projects of national interest under the Building Canada Act, and is expected to be finished its environmental assessment over the course of the summer. So very exciting, very big project. And if we can move forward again, we have a second project that was referred to the Major Projects Office here in Canada, and that's the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor that you've probably heard. I know Travis mentioned it, and on the floor we also heard Brandon mention it, and that is more commonly referred to as the Grays Bay Porton Road. So it leaves from around the Yellowknife area, so north of Great Slave Lake, travels up to the border of Nunavut, and then travels through Nunavut to a deep sea port. And that travels through what is called the Slave Geological Province, which is one of the most critically rich areas in Canada. Absolutely everything that we end up testing around there is rich in critical minerals and is a very exciting project for us. It does not connect communities. That would solely be a commercial road specific to mining and development. And then our third project that we have underway rather, if we go to the next slide, please. Thank you so much, is the Tulston Hydro Expansion. So this hydro expansion would connect 70% of the territory to hydro energy, which is huge. Absolutely anytime I talk to investors around the world, they want to know where our energy is coming from. We've had 7 difficult years of drought in the territory, which has really impacted our access to hydro. And that means that a lot of our energy comes from diesel, and nobody wants to hear about that, especially not in Canada. And so this is an absolutely significant project, not just for residents of the territory, but also for potential mining operations. What I wanted to point out that you probably saw in all the bullets here is that every single one of these projects has a steering committee and project leads that are made up of Indigenous governments. That is significant because that means that Indigenous governments are part of the project right from the get-go. And that means that we are working through any challenges, any areas of concerns together right from the very beginning of the project. And then why does this matter to PNWER? Why does this matter to all of you? We in the Northwest Territories, we've got great rocks. We don't have refineries. We don't have plans to process these. We don't have a tremendous amount of manufacturing in the territory. We have an embryo of a manufacturing industry. It's not even in its infancy, I would say, but definitely some innovative and inspired residents who are looking for ways to team up with Southern innovators. But certainly a lot of the downstream and value add process of these critical minerals is going to happen in all of your jurisdictions. That's why this matters to everybody at PNWER. Investing in the Arctic is actually investing in all of your jurisdictions. So I just wanted to give you the lay of the land of where I've joined you all from and what it is we have to offer. Now I look forward to jumping into some of the challenges and some of the lessons learned.
No, thank you for that. And then as mayor of Edmonton, I attest that what goes on in the territories has a direct impact on the economies of cities like Edmonton and other northern cities and throughout the PNWER region. So the 3 projects that you have talked about, they're all have gone through the Major Projects Office. And these are the projects that I remember when I was Minister of Infrastructure in 2015, 2016, and 17 that we were talking about at the same time. And we're not moving ahead much as here we are in 2026, right? So it's good to see that happen. You identified infrastructure as a challenge. And I really appreciate your comments about Indigenous participation. The question I want to pose you is the people that we need to build this infrastructure. Are you seeing the collaboration between governments, education institutions, private sector to train the people that we need, not only for the projects that you have in the pipeline, but there's so many other projects that community and provinces and federal government and the states are talking about?
So right now in the Northwest Territories, we are at an all hands on deck moment. We are at a generational shift in the Northwest Territories. So in March, the Prime Minister did come up to Yellowknife, and in addition to our 3 major projects, also announced funding for Department of Defense. So D&D funding for both Yellowknife investment and Inuvik investment in both airports and forward operating bases for the military. Together, all 5 of those projects, so the 3 infrastructure projects plus then the 2 airport projects for defense spending, amount to about $40 billion in spending in the Northwest Territories. Our annual operating budget for our government is $2 billion. For some of you, that's like the change that you find in between the couch cushions. That's our entire operating budget. And so it is absolutely an imperative time. It is a time where we refuse to kind of lose that opportunity that sits in front of us. But knowing that we can't take on $40 billion of work in the Northwest Territories with 44,000 people, many of which are babies and children. And so we know we have a tremendous amount of workforce development to do. We know that we are going to have to get creative. There are a tremendous amount of communities with people who want to be part of this story. They want to be building the road that they're going to be driving on, their grandkids are going to be driving on. But they need some new skills in order to do that and to transition from diamond mining to road building. So we're going to have to figure out how we prioritize and are purposeful in this training. Because we can't be everything to everybody, but we're going to have to be creative in how we bring training to community. In some of those communities where I had the opportunity to sit in Wrigley, which is at the southernmost tip of the start of the build of the Mackenzie Valley Highway, and having conversations around, you know, who wants to be a heavy equipment operator, who wants to do this type of work, who wants to do Class 1 licensing, realizing, oh, wait, we got to start with a learner's license first for some people. And so really looking at the entire system and the entire needs of a community and making sure that we go, okay, where are we together going to put our efforts to make sure we get this done and that people participate in the way they want to participate in this project. So workforce development is certainly what keeps me up at night, but I think we also have to realize that we won't be able to, as a territory, take on absolutely every piece of this project.
Heather, can you add on that?
Add on this because if we're even moderately successful, the labor force is going to be the bottleneck in what we're doing. And I actually heard the president of the Mining Association of Canada last week say that the unemployment rate in mining in Canada was 1%. And so that's a very tight market. And we're at the beginning of the commodity cycle. And to your point, mining is competing with electricity and data centers and is competing with oil and natural gas and LNG. And it's very much the same labor pool, which is good, but they're all, you know, ramping up, which is a challenge, is difficult. And as another, data point, my husband actually works in the last diamond mine in the Northwest Territories, Gatchokwe. They will be closing soon. So everyone there is looking for jobs. And I can say that they've all been sniped up. That everyone that want, I think probably 40% have already left. Sometimes they're leaving in whole crews. There are other mines that are ramping up that are absorbing that mining workforce. They aren't. So it's good for my husband and good for all those workers, but it gives you a sense of the tightness of the labor market. And that is one thing when we had to think of as a region, where there's a benefit. If we can share a labor pool and we can develop a labor pool throughout the region, we can absorb it, and we will need to. The other thing that we found ourselves in this conundrum, mining is a boom and bust cycle. Resources are boom and bust. So it's natural that we had a very tight labor force 15 years ago. Wages went up. We had a lot of net immigration into Alberta and Saskatchewan. And then you go through the commodities bust and unemployment goes up. And, so this is the ebb and flow of it. But in this last 10 years in particular, there was also a denigration of resource extraction. It was not popular for our young people to want to go into these sectors. They were encouraged to go into university. I have 3 university degrees. I'm not, I have no moral high ground on this, but they were encouraged to go to universities instead of trade schools. And we see now that we have that real imbalance in our economy. And so there does need to be, teaching millennials and Gen Z to appreciate or be proud of resource extraction, to think about fly in, fly out opportunities, camp opportunities. These are particular lifestyles that if you haven't been modeled or shown it, may seem inaccessible or unattractive. So we all need to think about how do we make it more popular, more acceptable. Wages will do a big part of that job. But still, as a society, I think we need to be, and Matt, you talked about the investments in the mine school. That's a big part of it too. And we're short on petroleum and mining engineers right now. And the schools have had under enrollment for the last 10 years. And we have to crawl our way out of this hole that we've dug ourselves now.
I think that that pride in the work that people do to build our communities and infrastructure is so essential. Like I come from working class background. I'm a former bus driver. I understand how important that job is for social mobility, and I took pride in what I did. And I think we need to continue to reinforce the value how workers build our country and our provinces and the states. Uh, Matthew, if you have to add on the workforce, I would welcome your comments on that too. But I do want to pivot a bit onto the where do you see the greatest opportunities for Canada and the United States to work together effectively on critical minerals, and what are those opportunities? Are there regulatory changes that are being made that present us with the opportunities, or their infrastructure? I know Minister Cleveland touched on the work that's being done in the Northwest Territories. Like, what are those? Like, are investment opportunities? Can you touch a bit on that? What is working?
Sure. I mean, on the workforce piece, I just think we need to be doing everything from kindergarten all the way into retraining professionals that are already in the workforce that might be able to, make a pivot. And I don't want this to become a commercial for Montana Tech, but that one program that they have right now is it's called the Graduate Certificates in Critical Minerals Processing. It is a program that is being funded from the Department of War for people that have already gotten a degree, not necessarily an advanced degree, but just a technical degree. And they decide, well, maybe they're working in civil engineering, and they say, well, I really want to be part of helping us advance and get back into creating a stable supply chain for critical minerals. They can enroll in this program at Montana Tech. There's 7 10-hour certificates that you can go through to get a graduate certificate in everything from project management of critical minerals projects at the development phase, or critical minerals processing, like a minerals and materials processing certificate. So a good way to grab people that are not done with their work in their career, but maybe being able to pivot without having to go back to school. That's an important one. And I would go back to, maybe even expand a little bit more on what Heather said about these. I don't think that enough kids, when I say kids, that's a pretty broad one. So let's just say these elementary age and up to middle school kids, they don't even know or aren't even being told that there is a career for them in mining or mineral processing, because it has just been so difficult to make ends meet, because everything's been shipped over to nations that don't have the social, environmental, and labor standards that we demand in America and Canada. So I think we really got to invigorate how we market this to our next generation, because it's going to take a generation for us to get back on stable ground with our workforce in the minerals technologies, but also in the infrastructure projects that go there. And so everything from trade schools to K-12 education to retraining of professionals that are already in the mix is important. And I apologize for saying way more than I wanted to say on the workforce piece of this. But pivoting back to what you asked me, what are we doing right, or where are the opportunities? I would just harken back. I think we're doing a lot of it, or we're starting to do a lot of it. And so we just need to do more faster. I failed to mention that, whereas it's a real downer to acknowledge that China is restricted the export and the technologies on 40% of the list of elements that are critical to the US. Montana on the positive side, and it probably holds the same for the Northwest Territories and other provinces, but Montana in and of itself has 70% of the critical minerals that are on that list. And it's just a matter of figuring out through better permitting and working together for the processing pieces of this, how we move those projects forward. I mean, I'd say a good third or half of the producing companies that I have working in Montana right now are Canadian companies. You know, Barrick is a Canadian company. Magris Talc, Canadian company. A lot of the expertise that goes into successfully and responsibly developing a mine are being provided by Canadian companies. Stantec Engineering, Knight Piésold is a world leader in tailings facility management. I just think doing more of the same. A lot of our raw materials, like you pointed out from Northwest Territories, the value add, we're shipping a lot of our raw materials and concentrates that come out of the ground in Montana to places like Trail, British Columbia, or out to Quebec for smelting and refining. And I just think we have to be looking at it holistically and not being discouraged or distracted by the political noise of tariffs and what your prime minister said to our president or vice versa. I mean, let's just continue to get stuff done and get it done quicker and get more of it going. And that's where the big opportunities are. Just focus on what the job is at hand. And I think there's nothing we can't achieve.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Minister.
I'm just, listening to both yourself and Heather and thinking of, not in reinventing the wheel, but how do we work holistically together, and especially that piece on addressing the school students, the elementary school students, the high school students. One of my favorite examples is 100 years ago, the U.S. came up with the Farmers of America, Young Farmers of America. And it was incredibly effective. And for the last 100 years, you've got this organization that all the students get to be a part of that want to be a part of it. They've got, different learning opportunities. You can design different curriculum, because as you're talking, I've got put my other hat on, my education hat on, and there's so much pressure on our teachers. We cannot rely on our teachers to come up with curriculum that speaks to what we're speaking of here today. And really, I think it needs to be so relevant to industry. And so teaming up with industry to come up with something that's more specific to mining, that is a curriculum that students can partake in. Students can learn about the varied jobs. Like, for example, in the Northwest Territories, land guardians are part of our mining industry. And so it's such a varied workforce. And so I think there's an opportunity to really look at some of our other success stories, or your success stories, I should say.
So young miners of North America, right? Yeah, PNWER.
I like
young miners of PNWER. Here we go. Something to the organizations to follow up on, right? I want to stay with you, Mr. Cleveland. Earlier this year, Canada's Western and Northern governments signed an MOU to develop a shared critical minerals strategy, and you played a very, very important role in that. Can you speak to what that strategy includes? And then I'm going to go to Heather to build on that. Heather, like, what can PNWER region partners can learn from that strategy?
Thank you. Appreciate it. So two things. So I was co-chair as well for energy and mining ministers for Canada over the last year, just passed it on to Ontario for this next year, and then also sat with Western mining ministers. And some of the work that we did with the energy and mining ministers was every province and territory came up with their own regional industrial zone. And so for us, it was Great Slave Lake. That includes barging, it includes rail, the road access needed to get into the mines around the lake. And so that was really focused on that national table. When it came to the Western MOU that we signed, it was about creating a system. So it's been mentioned in other panel discussions that Canada really does operate as though we're 13 different countries. We have our own trade rules, we've got our own legislation, we kind of, we've got our own autonomy across the country, which doesn't always serve us well. And so when we're talking to other jurisdictions and saying, okay, now come to our country and figure it out, we're not doing ourselves any favors at the end of the day, because how things work in the Northwest Territories is very different than how things work in Alberta. But if we're able as a jurisdiction to work together and say, okay, this rock can come out of this region, it can get processed in Alberta or BC, whoever decides, I'm not going to make their decisions for them. And then it can travel over. We've heard a lot about the port in Vancouver and the $1 billion a day that are leaving from the port there. But if we're all of a sudden selling our allied countries a system rather than an opportunity to dig and unravel the thread themselves, we're doing ourselves a massive favor as a country when we're trying to create that critical mineral superpower that we are trying to do together, and to create ultimately a supply chain that is pre-designed for our buyer.
Heather, can you build on that? What can PNWER region, how can we build on that MOU? What potential there is for the region?
Yeah, and what she's describing is, a belated effort to do better collaboration, to make it easier for ourselves to build and to attract investment. And the principles, if you read the strategy, it's quite high level, and it would be perfectly applicable to PNWER. So I just wanted to describe to you a little bit of the collaboration that already happens in this region, that maybe wasn't because the government's doing anything, but because, industry figured out, and there was a framework for them to build into it. But the very most important thing is the integration between the Red Dog mine in Alaska and the tech processing facility in Trail. And they process zinc, and and you said, Matt, they'll bring in concentrates from other providers as well, but zinc is kind of, I think, their bread and butter. And that is just last week, actually. This is probably the biggest news in PNWER in the last year, I would say, in the critical minerals front since our last meeting, was a $400 million investment from the government of Canada that will be, added on by Teck. So it's over $1 billion investment to allow that facility, which makes its money off of processing zinc, to do germanium, gallium, and antimony. And those are the ones that we really need to work together to get off of dependence on China. Now it's actually happening. You can see that investment has been made, and we're using Alaska minerals, and we're processing them in BC, and the region will be more secure, and our two countries will be more secure. There's other ways we collaborate. Lots of, I think Montana coal goes through West Shore terminals in Vancouver. Lots of Saskatchewan potash goes through Oregon. It used to go through Washington State. There'll be some more going through Washington State soon, I think, from Nutrien. And so it is very helpful to have this integration. But I have to say, Matt, I think from an industry perspective, there have been no tariffs on critical minerals, and businesses want to do businesses with each other. And that's mostly been the same. But at a federal level and a really, kind of foreign policy level, there has been a change that I would say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, Canada was happy to be the junior partner of the United States. And you put 7 actually DPA investments into Canada. I think 1 or 2 of them was in the Northwest Territories. It was very much a joint collaboration. And now that there's been this break, you are seeing more unilateral initiatives, not from Canada and the United States, but from a lot of countries, Australia. People are acting more unilaterally because it is tricky to act multilaterally right now, and it's tricky to act bilaterally with the United States. And so when if you thought, it's the West versus China, or it's, a free market versus a market, a kind of authoritarian controlled market, and we're trying to compete with that. On the one hand, we're all doing more, but on the other hand, we aren't collaborating at a government level as much as we probably would have otherwise. And so thank God for free markets and industry, because they'll do the most efficient thing, and they keep going. But I hope in the next few years, and maybe PNWER is a region where, because there's more trust and there's already collaboration, that it's a little bit easier to do at this level than at an Ottawa, DC or a NATO level.
We're going to open up for questions from the audience. So please raise your hand. if you have a question. But Matthew, I'm going to come to you quick for a quick answer. Like, if you talked about a lot of positive stuff, good things that are happening, which absolutely phenomenal. Like, if you were to identify one biggest bottleneck that you're seeing in this sector, what would that be?
The biggest bottleneck, I think, is the downstream processing and manufacturing. I mean, like you could wave a magic wand and fix the permitting reform and open 100 new mines. You're going to end up shipping the vast majority of that stuff. Now, granted, we'll send as much of it as we possibly can to the existing processing facilities in Canada, which will take up a percentage of that increased production, but you're going to end up sending most of it to China anyway. And so I think that's really what the big bottleneck is. And there's no way of creating that downstream processing because it's very electricity and energy intensive without figuring out how we're going to power those units too. And that, depends on needing to locate where those facilities are going to be placed, where there's existing infrastructure and the ability for us to, either dedicate existing generation or build new generation without having it be too expensive to transmit it to or basically get it permitted. It's really important too. I mean, I hate to keep coming back to the worst case scenario, which is defense, but we're seeing, even with all of this positive development that we're seeing, we're still 2 to 3 years out on being able to be anywhere remotely self-sufficient in producing from mine to consumer, being our defense and security folks, from being able to be self-sufficient in that entire supply chain. And I hate reading and seeing about all of this warfare out there, but we are going through a whole lot of munitions and drones and God knows what else. And I don't, right now, we depend on our geopolitical adversaries to replenish those supplies.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Heather, you want to add to that?
Follow-ups. I meant to say in the last comment, one area where I'm at, I think maybe the region should consider working together is on copper refining. And that's a very difficult market. There is excess capacity. China has overcapacity. And so the pure economics don't really work for that. We're down to one copper smelter in Canada. But copper obviously is the probably the most important metal right now, and it's because you need it for electricity, and we're all trying to electrify, and electricity is really where you're seeing the biggest bottleneck and the mismatch between supply and demand, and it's also stopping AI. So there's a lot of reasons why you would want us to be more self-sufficient in copper. Saskatchewan just started producing copper a few months ago. That was the first new base metal, greenfield base metal mine to open in Canada over 15 years. So that tells you where we're, it's been a lost, 15 years. Saskatchewan's producing copper. Obviously, BC is going to be producing more copper. Alaska has very good opportunity to produce more copper. You do need quite a bit of scale to invest in a copper smelter. And it would probably require some federal funding, some government funding. But that is one, I think, in the PNWER region, we may say, you know what, is in our interest, we're going to produce more. We don't want to ship all our concentrate over to China. Very much do not want to do that. Is there something we can do in this region to keep that copper concentrate here and supply the rest of the North American market with it?
Great. Okay, questions from the audience. Steve?
Yes, this is probably for Heather, but with the lack of manpower up in Northwest Territories, is there a future role for robotics?
I think we're at the point where, well, we already do see some of it up at in our diamond mines where we do have, for example, some of the pit trucks that are operated remotely. So there is that element of it. I think it will depend on kind of how the contracting goes with industry and what they end up bringing to the table. It's not the government that's going to be building, for example, the road or the mines. But certainly there's examples of using automation in some of the mining that's already happening in the Northwest Territories. Essentially, what I would like to say is what we want to learn from the way we did it before. When we did our diamond mines, we did not end up with enough people trained at the end of the day. We did not end up with enough community members who were leaving with, finished apprentices. And I have to say, the diamond mines have been incredibly wonderful, but we need to make sure that at the end of the day, when the road is built, when the warehouses are done, when our new hydro facility is expanded, that we can maintain this stuff at the end of the day. We need to make sure that we're not fully reliant on people continuously coming to the north to continue outfitting the north. We need to be able to use this process to lift the north so that we can maintain this infrastructure at the end of the day. So we're going to need a lot more people than what we have in order to make $40 billion, put $40 billion to work in the Northwest Territories. Certainly open to creativity, but we also need to make sure that in a lot of these communities where these projects are happening, where there is low employment, that people are working.
There's a lot of move towards autonomous haul truck, I think, and Matt, you can speak more on this, but what I'll say is, at an economic level, if it makes sense over a certain amount of period to go autonomous and invest in that over a workforce that you expect is going to be more scarce and that wages will go up, there's a number at which a mine will say it makes sense to go autonomous. And I think we'll see that number reached in more mines in North America in this boom than in the last one, because you will need to use AI and robotics and autonomous driving in some cases to compensate for the lack of workforce.
Matthew, you have any thoughts on the automation and use of robotics in your industry?
I think Heather answered that good. I mean, economics is what's gonna bear out on how quickly it gets applied, but we should be one step ahead of the curve. That's going to lead, much like a electric vehicle utilizes up to 5 times the metals and critical minerals that a conventional vehicle does. Autonomous robotic mining, it's going to take a lot more of the metals and those finished products than traditional mining does.
Yeah. And also like in areas where those minerals are and the mining potential, that's also the areas that face high unemployment as well, right? I think that's another dynamic that you have to consider about the benefits to the community. Other questions? Come on. This is your chance. You got 3 excellent experts. Mike is coming your way. Yeah.
Hi, Stephanie Speroni from Stantec. Hi, Matt. Thanks for the shout out earlier. Very happy to be contributing to the mining industry.
And headquartered in Edmonton.
Headquartered right behind you, actually.
Yes, yeah.
So just kind of wanted to give you the opportunity, Minister Cleveland, to talk about the interplay between these major projects in the north and the defense industrial strategy, and also whether there's any concerns with the forward operating location in Inuvik on the increasing the unemployment or the employment situation, because that will also take a lot of manpower to get built.
The biggest concern that I am hearing about today really is exactly what we've been talking about, workforce development. So how are we going to make sure that people have the opportunity to choose if they want to be a part of these projects? We have about just over 2,000 people in the territory that are currently not working. Not every single one of those people are going to be in a position to turn around and to work, right? We do have a lot of social challenges in the territory as well. And so that doesn't mean that we have 2,000 people that are going to be ready to walk into a workforce training opportunity and to pursue that. But certainly that's what we're hearing the most from chiefs. If those opportunities are not made available, that has the potential to kibosh projects. or if, for example, local businesses do not have a pathway to participate in these projects, that also stands to really damage the reputation of a project. And so that is a huge concern right now. We've got Major Projects Office that's doing engagement across the territory with communities at the moment. We have sat down, including our Indigenous Development Corporations, with Minister Jolie and her staff as well, to make sure that they're hearing procurement concerns. And also taking some lessons learned from projects like Giant Mine. What were the successes there? What did work? What did not work? And what I just spoke with a representative of the federal government this morning, and I think what's important is, you know, the example of Giant Mine, we were seeing the employment numbers for Northern employment going down. And what I was hearing from Indigenous governments is they were actually sending more people than ever before to the work site, and were actually making changes to the way that they were doing business. So to combat some absenteeism, they were starting to treat Giant Mine actually like a work site and actually doing 2 and 2. And they found that the absenteeism actually improved with staff. And so when we really dug into the aggregate numbers, what we found was that there was way more Northerners working on the project, but because the scope of the project grew so big and had so many more components to it, the numbers weren't telling the real story. What I'd also love to point out is we do have different industries like Agnico Eagle in the territories that are doing a lot of good work. Agnico is really taken on, and I have to say kudos to Gachagua and Diavik as well, because they've really taken on this whole, what do we need to do to train Northerners? What do we need to do to say to our staff, what role do you want within our organization? And let's train you and do kind of a holistic wraparound of this person to get them there. So what we're seeing right now with Agnico Eagle, that has mining operations in Nunavut, is they're actually using a Northwest Territories-based college to do their apprenticeship training with their staff. They're actually making it an all-of-family experience and seeing a lot of success in that. And so how industry chooses to show up also matters a lot. And as a government, how we show up to support industry in that matters as well. And I think that's the change you're seeing right now is, I know I can't do this by myself as government. I know industry can't do it by themselves. So where's that intersection of how we can work together, and how are we not doing it efficiently? I want to know too.
Got it. Got it. Any other questions from the audience? Go ahead, sir. Just wait for the mic. Yeah. So everyone can hear the question. Yeah.
So my question would be for Matthew. Is there would it be lucrative maybe to go back through the old tailings of mines that are now defunct or whatever and reprocess those, trying to find rare earth metals that weren't important at that time, but they are now?
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that I alluded to on the policy side, that bridge program, I think, the Bridge Act, it's trying to push more focus on what we can do to make our industry more circular. And actually, Montana is we've developed a program that we're trying to use as a case study that can be expanded elsewhere. And it's because of the things that you said. I mean, gallium, there wasn't even a use for it 100 years ago. That doesn't mean it's not laying in a lot of waste rock piles or tailings dumps. And so trying to advance the technology to go in and economically extract those resources from old waste streams, but also existing waste streams. And that's another place where China is being very strategic and stingy with the technology. The way, I mean, there's very few primary source critical mineral facilities. Now that's becoming less and less true with the expansion of the list, but particularly things like gallium, germanium. You don't go to work in a germanium mine. Germanium is a byproduct of zinc, or a copper mine is the primary metal, and cobalt is a secondary source of it. There's very few primary sources. And so doing what we can to extract more out of the already permitted holes that we have, as well as go back through our waste stockpiles and re-extract things. That is very much needs to be a part of the equation, but it's balanced with the reality that we can do all of that while we try and continue to fix the permitting, but we are going to have to fix the permitting because with the increased projections in demand, we can't get away from not having to open new mines. So we can do better on the extraction and recycling and reuse, but we also got to do better on being able to permit new mines and making sure those new mines are more circular than the ones we operated yesterday and today.
Heather, you want to add to that?
I do, because it's a great question. And I think there's just, again, a number where reprocessing tailings makes more sense than building a greenfield mine. And you know, some jurisdictions are at that number, you know, but that's another problem with, you know, China's way ahead on the science and the technology of this. Again, because we've had that dearth of people interested in mining in universities where you would figure out this. How do you bioleach, or how do you extract, and what are the costs, and what are the, you know, we haven't been doing that science nearly enough as we should have. But there's one other element to this, and Matt alluded to that. You know, most mines make money off the things that you've heard of. You know, they make money off of gold or copper or nickel or zinc, and not much else. And I know in exploration, I was talking to the Association of Mineral Explorations, you know, they almost exclusively, especially in our region, you know, outside of Saskatchewan, explore for copper and gold. And when they do their assays and see, well, you know, we've drilled this and is it valuable or not, they're only checking for gold and copper because nothing else makes money. And so we have a lot of, you know, geology, and we haven't even checked to see, well, is it high in antimony or tungsten or bismuth? Things that now we think we need for defense purposes, but that a mining company does not want to absorb that cost. So there is a big opportunity here to either look at tailings or look at, you know, mines that you're already mining and say, well, is there enough of this tertiary or, you know, is a second order product that we might, you know, with a little bit of government help, at least know that it's there. So if there was a war with Taiwan, we could quickly, you know, extract more. So we just have not been thinking about those niche metals. And there's been no incentive to see where they are, how much we have, what the deposits are. And obviously tailings are expected to be a very rich source for a lot of these. But again, the economics hasn't made it make sense. So maybe in some cases for security purposes, the government needs to step in and help get it over that threshold.
So Heather, you triggered a question. Yes, governments can help on the regulatory side of things, improve the process, infrastructure investments, absolutely important. What else? Like when you said there are areas where private sector will not invest because there's not enough return or lack of return. So what role governments can play in that specific area to de-risk that investment?
And number one is going to be, you know, do the better permitting
Yep.
first for everything,
Yep.
because that's practically free.
Yep.
So just do faster, better permitting. And some projects will get over the threshold just with faster, better permitting. And that goes for processing too. Like, does anyone here think it's going to be easy to start a smelter in BC or Quebec? Like, it won't. And the environmental threshold will absolutely not, the two won't match. But if there's a security reason to say, I don't know, maybe we need to think these through, or the government will take care of the environmental costs that they insist on to get the social license, you know, so that's part of it. But there are a number of tools, and we all, you know, there's a number of tools that we're all talking about, and it's a matter of which project and which amount, and being careful that we don't distort markets. So in some sense, I feel like we're getting too much of the game of China's done this, we should do what China's doing. Well, China is a terrible allocator of capital, and they have misallocated a tremendous amount of capital, and their GDP per capita will never be the same as ours because of the way that they organize their system. But at the same time, there's some security risks, you know, that they are better and more nimbler on doing than we are. So I don't want to abandon the free market. But in certain cases for these non-free market minerals, yeah, we need to step in. And it's about 2% of the global market, by the way. Like, you're never going to step in on gold. But anyways, so, you know, stockpiles is one that we talk about. And Matt will know. And now you were already getting more sophisticated on this. There's no point stockpiling something if you can't process it. So, okay, we need it immediately, and we need it for the defense industrial supply chain, and there's a conflict we're in, and you have a pile of graphite, or you have a pile of rare earths and no capability to make them into magnets. So you can't, there's no point stockpiling it if the rest of the stream is not in place. There's also things that are very expensive to stockpile. And so you think, is this cost benefit worth it? Or that are unstable, that are just, chemically unstable, and you can't really stockpile it. So some things stockpile, yes, but actually a lot of things, no, you don't stockpile. Some things the government have taken, especially the United States, taken equity in projects. And for me, that's a nuclear option. Like that is the government, they like to do it first. Quebec does it too. Donald Trump, he's, kind of acting like a New York, hedge fund manager. I don't, as a free market person, I think taking equity in a project should be the last option. But I won't say that there's not a single option, not a single project, not a single situation where equity won't be an answer. But probably better than equity is just taking offtake. And so what a company actually needs to get the financing and to do these things is to have someone that takes the offtake for them. And if the government takes offtake and they don't make the components, but at least, they're absorbing that risk. And what you can do is say, I'll take the offtake, but I'll pay you to hold it. I'll pay you to be part of your inventory. And what it looks like is you just need more inventory. I'm going to pay you to produce more and have a higher inventory. And that's what the offtake could look like in that situation. So people are starting to get quite sophisticated. I'll say 3 or 4 years ago, we were all just saying, we need critical minerals, that's not, if you're still saying critical minerals, it's not sophisticated. What you need, if you're saying gallium, okay, we're getting close. If you're saying, spheronization, then okay, I know that we're talking in a sophisticated way. We're getting closer to actually solving the problem. But in 4 years, everyone, we have gone a lot closer to being sophisticated and solving the problems for specific commodities at specific stages of development.
Got it. The Canada Infrastructure Bank was created to de-risk some of these investment, where they were more on the transportation infrastructure side of things. But there's a role where government can come in. I want to get your thoughts on this, Minister Cleveland, like where I know it has to be last resort, where governments come in, take a share, an equity, but not the first, right? Like where you got to draw that line somewhere. Like where do you risk public dollars to the benefits, even though there's security reasons and many other reasons to do so?
Well, for us, when we enter into agreements with the federal government in a territory, it's typically about a 75-25 split. Where we've been with these major projects over the course of decades is we end up in a chicken and an egg scenario where it's like, what does the financing look like? Well, are you going to commit? And so we always end up in a situation where we're trying to figure out if we have the money or not. They're trying to figure out if we can afford it. Look behind the curtain. We can't afford to do these projects on our own. And so we are reliant on solutions like Canada Infrastructure Bank. Canada Infrastructure Bank is one of the partners at the table looking at the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor because it does have the potential to be a toll road at the end of the day. In addition to these projects, we're not the only ones at the table for any of these projects. We're at the table as equals with Indigenous governments whose land these projects are unfolding on. And certainly one of the things that is consistent in the Northwest Territories is benefit agreements. And so that's something that we've recently legislated into our Mineral Resources Act when we're talking about mineral extraction is the benefit agreements. And those are not like us as government. We don't sit at the table and decide if they're good benefit agreements or not. That is between industry and Indigenous governments to decide what that relationship looks like. Some Indigenous governments are looking at equity. So for example, we have a current project that is that Indigenous governments are working on with a mine where they would have ownership over the energy portion. And so that means that they as well are pulling revenue right as soon as the project starts. We have other situations or instances where Indigenous governments are really concerned about workforce development and investment in education of the community. And so really it's a unique arrangement. One of the things I would say is when we were talking earlier about bottlenecks and challenges, that I would like to add in is what I see as some of the greatest challenges and risks for projects where I'm from is we have some Indigenous governments who have modern treaties and land settlement agreements with the government of Canada, and others who do not. And so there's a different funding arrangement and access to capital that exists between Indigenous governments. And that means not everyone can show up to the table in the same way. And I've had conversations with some mining proponents who have said to me, well, I reached out and emailed this Indigenous government. They never got back to me. And so they're not open for business. They're not interested. And it was like, well, hold on. You're one of 90 companies that has emailed them in the last 6 months. So don't send them another email. Show up to town, grab a box of donuts and head down the road. And now that conversation is moving along. They have that partnership. They're working on agreements and they're moving forward. So making sure that Indigenous governments have the capacity that they need to show up to the table and be real partners is so important.
I think that that last point is so critical, because when I was leading the federal government's Indigenous consultation to redo the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project's obligation on meeting the constitutional obligation for Indigenous consultation, one thing we heard over and over and over again from Indigenous communities is that they have too many people are asking them to get involved. In this case, build their capacity. So what we did was actually created a fund that Indigenous communities could tap into, hire their consultant folks or hire their lawyers that they needed to have, equal capacity in a way that they could have good negotiations on their needs. This is great conversation. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. But I do have last question. I'll start with you, Matthew. Right. So to just wrap up, like if you could recommend just one action that governments, premiers, governors, legislatures, federal policymakers should prioritize over the next 2 years to strengthen North America's critical mineral supply chain, what that action would be?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Put me right on the spot. Yeah, I guess this sounds somewhat of a cop out, but I think explore the success stories that we currently have, where we know that we are working together successfully. At the like a good example would be Red Dog sending its concentrates to the Trail British Columbia site and creating that circular supply chain within and across the two countries. I mean, just doing more of the things that we already know are working in particular places. I don't think there's any anything hiding under a rock, no pun intended. I think that there's a lot of good examples of things we're doing good right now. We just need to do more of those things.
Heather, what would that one ask be?
Yeah, and we've talked about so many things. So we just be remiss if we didn't talk about electricity. And there is an ask for electricity, and it is becoming a bottleneck, and it's a catch-22, because to electrify, we need more critical minerals, and to do more critical minerals, we need more electricity. And the two are conflicting, and in particular, they're conflicting in BC right now. That BC has a lot of industrial activity in its northern end. LNG needs a lot of electricity, especially if you want to do it net zero, as BC wants to do it and use hydro. That's competing with the Golden Triangle. And BC is already an importer of electricity right now because of other ambitions. So the federal government is stepping in that case with the Northwest transmission line, and that's good. And and it could extend to Yukon to help Yukon. Yukon has one operating mine right now, a Hecla silver mine. Silver, as you guys maybe in this room know, hit all-time highs in December. at the same time as Yukon had a cold event, minus 44. I think that mine was curtailed electricity like 12 times or something. So can you just imagine how upset you'd be if your silver is at all-time highs and you can't produce because you can't get electricity and Yukon utility is curtailing your power. So these are problems to go into the more remote areas. And if you think we're going to need the minerals from Alaska and Yukon and Northwest Territories, electricity is going to be a bottleneck for that right now. And it's already a bottleneck closer, to.
It is coming up in many, many conversations. Yeah, so it's going to be so essential for the overall economic growth. Minister Cleveland, from your perspective, what is that one thing? Well, you're the policymaker, so
I would say we need to get purposeful. Like we hear a lot. I think people really love the peanut butter and jam sandwich analogy, where especially as politicians, we like to make sure that we're giving everybody $5 rather than putting, all of our, $100 into this bucket right here and making sure that project is successful. So I think the more that we can get realistic about what our goals are as a country and actually being purposeful in our actions to make it happen, that frees us up, say, in a few years to say, okay, we were successful there. Let's now move on to the next one, rather than, to Heather's point, being decades without opening a mine. Let's get purposeful.
And I would add, now that I've heard a little bit more.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
I think we need to educate our kids and our general publics about how important this is to everything everybody does. I just don't think there's enough understanding and collaboration in getting that message out there. And with the minister's title, she's got all of the proper things in there. It's education, it's culture, it's employment, it's tourism. I mean, that's what I mean, we run into this issue where we got a lot of our adversaries, let's call them what they are, when relationships are at their worst, trying to pit mining and natural resource development, energy development against tourism. It's like, well, you can't have this mine, you'll ruin the recreation for trout fishing or hunting. The reality is we do a very effective job, and I'm sure it's the same in the Northwest Territories and British Columbia and all of the other PNWER states, but we have multi-billion-dollar mining industries alongside multi-billion-dollar tourism industries, and it's not a choice. We do it well, and we just got to continue to maintain that balance. But it all starts with getting past the sound bites that favor one side over the other and getting folks to understand that we are all in this together, and it takes all of us to get to where we need to be.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it is about building opportunities for everyone, and it's not one against the other. So thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Can we give a big round of applause to our panelists, right? So